Hola, welcome to NSU Brain Trust #2. Today our groups are here to talk about our philosopher profiles, and I shall begin. I, Joshua Hinkmeyer, am here today to tell you about Aristotle and his crazy ideas. Aristotle was born in 384 BC and lived to 322 BC. During this time of his, I'm going to talk about the historical significance of when he lived. During this time, he was born and kind of lived in Macedonia, and there's a lot of fighting between Macedonia and Athens, and there's lots of conflict. And because of this, Aristotle spent a lot of times running and fleeing between many different places. He was all over because there was so much conflict, and he was actually very important to one big conflict that happened in Athens. I'll get onto that later on. But during all this time, it was so important for him to come in because he played such an important role. Because Aristotle had actually taught Alexander the Great, which he eventually overthrew Athens and became the ruler, and then he got overthrown, and then they put up Aristotle for impiety, and he had to run because they were going to kill him. So during all this time too, they also had the Plato's Academy, which was pretty important to Aristotle's education because that's where he went to learn. And he eventually created this relationship between Plato and himself. And there was many other teachers there, and then after Plato died, they ultimately didn't let Aristotle go to teach it, even though he was a successful teacher there. He graduated from that academy because he disagreed with Plato so much. Aristotle had very many ideas of science and other stuff that they didn't necessarily agree with. He's considered the first scientist, although later on all of his ideas were very false. He created the ideas of classification and meteorology that he's one of the first people to start thinking about the world scientifically. Which rhetoricians, of course, and philosophers, not too big on the whole science concept. They kind of butt heads. So they did not let him become the predecessor to Plato in the academy. A lot of people blame the idea that he liked science so much on his father, because his father was a doctor. He died when Aristotle was 10 years old, but he probably didn't pass too much on to him, because I doubt any physicians can become pros in the first 10 years of their life. So I think it may have created interest in him to study those types of things. And I guess we'll get on to his philosophical ideas. One of the biggest things that Aristotle is remembered for is he's considered the father of logic. He said that the world as we see it and the world as we perceive it is all perceived through logic. And without it, you're not able to determine the things around you, which is part of the reason why he came up with his ideas of science. He just used what he could see as to determine what it was. He created this idea of syllogism, which is using logic to determine something. A good example of this would be education is good, one sentence. The next sentence, school produces education, therefore school is good. That's the syllogism, and he said you can use that to determine, based on assumptions, something, but we can also see the detriment to that, because education is good. Hitler has education, Hitler is good, which is not true. We can all determine that. But if we use this idea of syllogism, we can see where it can start to run into some issues. But it's a good way, it's a good starting concept that he created, logic and syllogism. He also talked about the ideas of logos, ethos, and pathos, and how you apply those in your speech, because everybody has the mind, the heart, and the gut. And if you just appeal to one, you ultimately aren't effective with your speech. You must use all three. So that's about his really big concepts of his philosophy and how he affected society so much. And we can see this in the modern sense of the idea, all through just political debates and stuff, he brought up the idea of morals and how we must base things on moral concepts. And that was ultimately what I think really affects us today. It's because you can take an idea that conflicts, such as both a lot of people like different types of foods or different types of something else, and how do you decide against that if one person believes in one thing and one person believes in the other? And Aristotle says you got to use your moral concept, because we may value it for different things, but if we go down to the very basics of morals, people can agree on certain morals. And if you use that, you can ultimately determine which one is better. And that is constantly being done every day in society today, presidential election to fighting with your brother and sister in the morning. So he's affected society in such a great way. Right after he had done his teachings, they were lost for a long time and then picked up again. So, but today we use his very basics, especially his logos, ethos, and pathos are used in very simple speech communications classes, and even speech in high school. Thank you. Who's next?
Hey, Dr. Walk. My philosopher is Cicero, and Cicero lived during ancient Rome, specifically during the time of the Roman Republic and the rise of Christianity, which affected his views later on in life. His philosophical teachings were primarily politically based because he put politics before philosophy in his life. He was also considered the greatest orator of Rome and the greatest and studied rhetoric in Rome, passed down Plato and Aristotle's views all throughout ancient Rome, rather than those views just being in Greece. He developed a lot of Christian views in his philosophies as well, which got him in trouble in the end and led to his murder later on in life. His views were carried on by St. Augustine, who passed down his views through the Catholic Church and through his own teachings, specifically the teachings that Cicero came to God and his sinful life was taken away and he became a better Christian, and Cicero thought that everybody could do this if they simply turned to God in the end, and for those reasons Cicero ended up being killed by non-believers and non-Christians in Rome, but his ideas are still carried on today through the church and through Augustine and Aquinas, who passed his views down.
Come on.
You got it.
All right, you got it. We're ready.
All right, so do I say my name
Yeah.
again? I'm Jared Holmgren, and my philosopher was Plato, and he lived about to be 80 years old. He was Greek. He was a rhetoric, interested in art, literature, justice, virtue, politics, education, family. One of his notable ideas was theory of forms, and that plays a big impact on what he believes and it's in a lot of his writings. He was a student of Socrates, and he founded the Academy in Athens. Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato they laid the foundation for Western philosophy and science. According to Aristotle, Plato developed foundations of his metaphysical and epistemology by studying a doctrine of Cratalyxus. I don't know. But anyways, Plato was a disciple of Socrates because Plato, his philosophy and style of debate was the same as Socrates. Studies directed towards the question of virtue, and the formation of notable character. Plato joined his uncle's military, but left shortly after because of violence. And he wanted to go into the Athens politics, but the execution of Socrates swayed his way out of politics forever. And then he traveled for 12 years with Socrates' friends, and during those 12 years he studied his contemporaries, geometry, geology, astronomy, and religion. And then they categorized Plato's work in 3 distinct groups. First group was Socratic dialogues, because of so much what he had to say was influenced by Socrates. The second one was the middle, just because it was the middle between the two, I guess. And that introduced his Platonic doctrine. Then he came up with his Republic, his writing there, and they said that was his best work. And the central question for that was how to live a good life. And he explains his views on government and how philosophers are the only people fit to rule the world. Yep, so it covers most of his ideas. Aristotle is Plato's famous pupil. Then there's the third dialogue, and it's called Later. This one barely had any of Socrates' influence on it. This takes a look at his earlier metaphysical speculations. It discussed art, including dance, music, poetry, architecture, drama, ethics, and that means like morality, the mind, realism. They also discussed mathematics, politics, religion, and mainly specifics in the religion was censorship, atheism, and pantheism. The theory of forms, he viewed the world of ideas was constant and true, and the world perceived through thought was changeable. And then when Plato died, he left the academy to his sister's son, and then it was closed by Emperor Justinian in 529 Common Era. The theories of forms is a pretty crazy idea, I thought. Well, just what he based most of his stuff off of. He had the theory of forms is why Plato thought that philosophers should be the only ones to rule, because they were the only ones that were seeking out true knowledge and not just imitations of knowledge. And he came up with this theory of eugenics, where they would regulate sexual reproduction and only allow special events where people were given sexual partners by fixed lottery. They tricked the people of breeding and produced strong children. Defective childs would be disposed at births, and philosophers would rule the land because, or they didn't want like the aristocratic people to have their own property, and they didn't want any family units. They'd like set up like nursing homes or something like that, and have the kids have no family bias and then be loyal to the state. So that's what I got.
My name's Lene Peterson, and my philosopher was Epictetus. He was born in 55 AD and died in 135 AD. He was a Greek and Stoic philosopher, so he could feel pain, but he never complained about it or shown it to anyone. He was a slave in when he was born, he was a slave in present-day Turkey, and then he was banished and moved to Greece. He believed that events are determined by fate. We can't control it, all we can do is accept it. Each individual, they are still responsible for their actions, and good and evil are good for everyone. And then each individual is connected to the world when they're younger, and then later on they are connected to the universe. His main idea was ethics of self-determination, which means they know the right and the wrong, and they know not to do it, but they still have to be aware of it, and they still have to suffer all the consequences.
Well, that concludes our amazing show. From my heart to the rest of the world, thank you for watching NSU Brain Trust. Come again.